I'm interviewing all of them. They just don't know it.
That is amazing.
When I need a driver, it's like, honey, let's order pizza, let's order Chinese, and I'm gonna go take an Uber to my buddy's house. These people
That is
drive for a living.
such a brilliant hiring strategy. Experts, I've got Nikola Simic with me, the owner of ReliaWheels in Ohio. Nick, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Recovering from a long weekend, but we're here, and I'm excited to hear some new stuff about Bambi and touch base again.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Nick, I want to dive in to your story about your background, how you got into running ReliaWheels, and your journey so far growing the business.
Absolutely. That's a loaded question, but we'll rewind back about 10, 15 years ago. My mom was involved in some home health care things in which I helped out with, just general as a helping hand, so to speak. So when patients or members had to go to doctor's appointments, we would schedule transportation, and I would ride along with them, kind of like a nurse's aide. I didn't provide any medical benefit or anything like that, just strictly as a companion. I saw the pricing model and kind of the ins and outs then, and so that kind of sparked my interest in the field. At that time, I was wrapping up high school, going into college, and so I ended up getting a business degree, in accounting. I worked for 10 years in accounting, treasury management, corporate finance, investments, you name it. The 10 years kind of flew by. Long story short, the opportunity came knocking to start my own business, and that's where we are with ReliaWheels. So I believe it was October of 2023 was my jump off point out of corporate America into entrepreneurship.
Why did you leave your 10-year career in finance to start a NEMT business?
Great question. I don't know if there was a single rhyme or reason. It was more so a timing thing, a little bit of a disagreement with management where I was, but we're all friends and everything's good there. It was just honestly the perfect point. The stock market was up, my portfolio was looking great. NEMT, when I was analyzing markets, so one thing I didn't touch on was I essentially managed an equities portfolio. And one thing I noticed, our company, that I was working for at the time was very industrial. And so in order to diversify our business, our operating business, my pitch was to invest in tech companies, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, that's an easy pitch. The Apples, the Teslas, the Googles, the Facebooks of the world, that's where that's where the returns are in the equity space. But long story short, one thing that jumped out to me too was the medical space. And with that being said, it's a good hedge regardless of what's going on in the economy. People need doctors, we're going to need transportation, and this kind of was a perfect crossroads. So for me, making the leap out of corporate America, my only risk was that I would fall on my face and run back. That hasn't been the case in almost 2 years. I'm hoping that doesn't become the case, but again, I could always go back is kind of where my head's at.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so let's start in October 2023. You started ReliaWheels, and tell me about the story of getting the business from 0 to 1.
Okay, so I want to say it was I think it was September. I'm in Florida. I had already put my 2 weeks in. I left my job in June. It's September. I'm in Florida. I'm by my sister's house, kicking around the idea of starting a bunch of different businesses. I even started a YouTube channel. I was opening up sports cards. That lasted a couple months when I burned $25,000 real quick, since those cards get expensive. But I kind of told myself, I was like, I got to do something, right? And that's where the NEMT kind of came back. And so, long story short, we're drinking wine. We're in Florida, maybe a bottle or two deep. I open up my phone, and as you know it, you think of something, it's on the phone. And so there was a van for sale. So, minimal questions asked. I essentially hit buy now. They delivered it to my house over here in Cleveland, Ohio. When I came back, van was sitting in the driveway. I immediately called my mom and I told her what I'd done. And so at that point, I realized, she's available, I'm available. If we're going to have one van, might as well have two. So as soon as I essentially landed back in Florida or back in Cleveland, I set up the LLC. That's actually a story within a story. It When I was in Florida, they were asking me for financing purposes and titling what I want to put the van in, and I said, "Well, it's for a business." They said, "What's the business name?" I go, "Well, I haven't thought about it yet, or had I registered anything yet." The van kind of came first before everything else. And so they go, "Okay, no problem. We'll put in your personal name." Well, as soon as I filled out all that paperwork, I said, "Well, shoot, I should probably come up with the name." I used a little bit of Chat GPT. They gave me like 25, different options, whatever. I ended up rolling with one, filed with the state of Ohio, just to find out. The light bulb went off when we were flying mid-flight back to Cleveland. As soon as we got to Hopkins, I looked to see if if the domain was available for that business name. And my awesome luck, it wasn't available. So I said, okay, back to the drawing board, back to Chat GPT, give me 25 more names. And that's actually where ReliaWheels came from. Thank you to Chat GPT and AI. But yeah, so that's the story. I got back to Cleveland, started, had one van, added another one within about 2 weeks, as fast as they could build it. And then,
What were these vans? Like, are they wheelchair, stretcher, just ambulatory vehicles? How did you decide on these vehicles?
good question. Well, the first one found me. It was a wheelchair van, 2019 Dodge Grand Caravan. So that one was used. And then that one, obviously, we can do, wheelchair and ambulatory without any issues. The second van, I also went wheelchair. It was a 2023 brand new Chrysler at the time. So, our route was essentially to specialize in wheelchair. And that's where we are today. So we went from two vans pre 2024 to now we're up to 13, with one getting delivered in the next few weeks. Will be 14.
Okay. Talk to me about the first trips that you ever did with those 1 to 2 vans that you started out with. Where did those trips come from? How did you get them? And how did you get the ball rolling from there?
Yeah, so I actually I pulled up the directory as far as all the companies in our county and close counties to Cuyahoga County where I'm at. And long story short, I put a list together of all the companies in our area. And there was actually one around the corner from me. I reached out to them first, and they were essentially our first customer. So I believe it was February 19th. So yeah, just to kind of put a timeline here, had the vans in October, November, filed for the business name. We didn't start trips until mid-February of 2024 of last year. And so yeah, that first trip came from essentially a peer here in Cleveland. They
So,
gave us a few
like a
private days.
NEMT business that's in your area, and you reached
Yes,
out to them and said, "Hey, do you guys have extra trips that you can't fulfill? We can do them for you."
exactly. I was looking on two different sides. I was looking for a partner, A, that I could either acquire, or B, someone that we could just help out. And long story short, they were like a one-man van. If I'm not mistaken, I referred them to you guys. I think they're using their software. I'm gonna have to double check, but I think our last conversation, he did say he loves it. Um, And so, yeah, that's how we started. And then from there, I ended up landing a contract with a local broker here. And then that's kind of where we blew up.
Okay. Can you share which broker it is?
Provider Ed.
Yeah. And when did you start working with Provider Ride?
So that was somewhat simultaneous in February. Yeah, mid February.
And so, like, the growth of your business, now you're up to like 13 vehicles. Has it largely been through the demand that Provider Ride has been sending you?
Yes. Yeah, I would say majority of our business is brokered, and then we do have a small portion of private pays just through, you know, reoccurring private pays, or people see our vans. Someone searches it from out of state. They need NEMT or wheelchair vans for a relative, a sibling, a parent, so to speak, and they see our reviews and they call us.
Okay, cool. Um, Vast majority of your trips are through Provider Ride, and then you've got a little bit of private pay just from word of mouth and people seeing you. So
Correct.
tell me this, of the 13 vehicles you operate now, like, are they largely all wheelchair? Or do you do any stretcher, any ambulatory?
So 99.99% wheelchair. We get
That's
a
a lot to
couple.
say.
Yeah, we get a couple ambulatory here and there, but for the most part, our vans are designed for wheelchair. We can do stretcher work as far as the capability of the vans. I just haven't got to that point yet, but it's definitely something on my radar in the near future as far as growing further.
Okay. So your demand, is fairly simple. It largely comes from this one broker, Provider Ride. Can you tell me about how that relationship developed from February 2024 till now, and what the growth of the business has been? Like, was it exponential over time, or was it linear? How did that relationship evolve over the past 1.5 years?
Yeah, good question. I think so our first meeting was I essentially did training with them, wheelchair securement training and all that. And I think that's where, we had a mutual respect for each other. And that's kind of how they found out about us. We found out about them. And so, they pulled us in for a meeting, and I pretty much laid out a game plan that, hey, I'm here to grow as quickly as you need us. And I don't, I got feedback maybe like 6 months ago. They were pleasantly surprised, from that day one meeting where I essentially put my money where my mouth was. And yeah, we were adding, I want to say, a van a month. Our biggest month as far as adding vans was in March or April of this year. We added four. So from February to December, we had 9 total vans, and then March, April, we were at 13,
Yeah,
and
I
now we
noticed
ordered
that
another one.
when I looked into Bambi and your
Yeah,
account. Like, wow, these guys have spiked.
Bambi's revenue went up. It's good. It's a win-win.
It's a win-win. So, for all of the audience out there who may work with brokers, may want to work with brokers or get more volume from brokers that they work with, I mean, you essentially went to this broker, Provider Ride, and said, hey, like, I want to grow with you guys. Like, give me more volume. I can expand as quickly as you need me to. It all sounds simple. Tell me about, what were the difficult parts about it for you, if any?
I would say, early on when it was just me and my mom, so I was doing the dispatching, I was doing the business development, so to speak. I was doing everything, right, including driving. And one of the things that I learned, not even here, but my career in finance, so to speak, is that it's easier to be bigger than smaller. And so my real time example of that was when we started this with 2 vans covering Cuyahoga County. We were traveling, a half hour, dead haul, empty to go get the next person, right? So we're all over the map just because we only had 2 assets at the time, 2 vans. And on top of that, I'm answering calls, dispatching, telling my mom where to go. Obviously, Bambi helps with that because it's just a matter of clicking a couple buttons. You can pull over on the side of the road and make that happen. But yeah, definitely, I felt the pain of being small. So if there was a 4 a.m. trip, 3 a.m. trip, I would do it. And then we might have a gap until, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. And I kept thinking to myself, if I have employees, how can I afford, that dead gap of no trips? And so long story short, once we kind of built that trust with the broker, and I was able to add more vans, they gave us more trips, and all of those gaps essentially got filled. So, as far as how I got there, yes, it was a struggle. And, I was doing trips at 4 in the morning till, 7 p.m. and everything in between. Anything they threw at us, I didn't say no. And so, now that we're bigger, now that we have assets everywhere, it's funny to look at the map on Bambi. If somebody calls us, we're probably within 20 minutes. We're essentially 20 minutes away in Cuyahoga County, just with the sheer, number of vans that we have in the area now.
Nick, that is a really interesting point. That it's easier to be bigger than smaller. And, this is not something that's often talked about, right? People are like, yeah, you start, you grow organically. But yeah, I mean, it totally makes sense, because when you have a bigger fleet, you have the economies of scale. So you have more revenue to offset the fixed costs that you have, regardless of whether you're 2 vehicles or 20 vehicles. And like you're saying, you're able to handle more trip volume because you just have more assets around that can take on that work. Tell me about that journey from where you were like a couple of vehicles and it's harder to now you're at scale and it's actually easier in terms of the numbers. So like, let's talk about, like the extent that you can share, like how your vehicle count went up, how your trip count went up, and just sort of the operational efficiency metrics that you saw change when you grew your fleet.
Yeah, I think one other big thing is understanding people, and that's almost impossible, just because just when you think you don't. And so that's what helped me also scale the business. Was I found people that, for example, not that I didn't like waking up at 4 a.m. I enjoyed it once I was up.
Who doesn't?
Right. But I knew for me it wasn't sustainable. I have 2 kids. We want more kids. And so, when I found those people that were like, hey, I'll work 3 days a week, from 4 in the morning till, do 3 13s essentially. That's when, the door kind of opened up where, okay, each van can do essentially, to give you metrics, anywhere from 8 to call it 15 trips, depending on where they're at, if they're short trips. So that's where having, the human resources, the drivers that were willing to work these odd hours that for them were fantastic. Right. The guy that I'm talking about, Mike, he delivered pizza for Domino's, and he actually knocked on my door. He had pizzas. We ordered pizza, and I saw him, and I said, "Hey, here's a card. If you ever want to change
That is
jobs,
awesome.
I'm here."
That is
Yeah,
the best driver hiring story I've heard. It's a short one and it's awesome.
exactly. And I knew he was local, so everything kind of made sense. And yeah, what these people don't know, all my Uber drivers, pizza, Uber Eats, Insta. I'm interviewing all of them. They just don't know it. When I need a driver, it's like, honey, let's order pizza, let's order Chinese, and I'm gonna go take an Uber to my buddy's house. These people
That is
drive for a
such
living.
a brilliant hiring strategy.
Yeah.
That is amazing.
Yeah, that's
Wow.
it's worked. It's worked, honestly. So, back to the numbers, it was an easy, having to. Then I stepped out, hired a driver. I was able to focus on dispatch 100%. And then once, we kept adding vans, it was just adding drivers, adding drivers, adding drivers, to the point now my first driver I promoted to dispatch. And now we actually have 2 dispatchers and backup drivers, so to speak. So that was another thing that I learned these last couple of months was, it made sense. I always said, why spend X for a dispatcher when I can do it? What am I going to do during the day? And it made sense. I had to do it, a business decision, because if one person is a no-show in the morning or gets sick, goes to the ER, you never know. And what ended up happening was we're all in the vans, right? So now, someone's dispatching essentially from the car. Well, now I essentially have 3 or 4 backups. So even the worst case scenario, we still have a designated dispatcher that's, sitting at home, just focused on dispatching. So that was kind of my new plug, so to speak.
Gotcha. So tell me about all the people who work for ReliaWheels. You have your drivers, right? You have your two dispatchers who serve as backup. There's you. Is there anybody else?
If you want to count my mother-in-law, when she goes to doctor's appointments, she's always passing out cards. Other than that, no.
Okay.
That's the
So
full
you run
gang.
a pretty simple, tight ship.
Absolutely. And Bambi allows us to do that.
Love to hear that. What are your plans for the next 2 years with ReliaWheels?
I'll be honest, I didn't think we were going to grow this fast. With that being said, I don't want to take my foot off the gas. My next focus, I mentioned I do have, I actually hired some, ex-firefighter paramedics that could be a good fit for the stretcher work if we want to move in that direction, or at least be our baseline. But I think more importantly, I do want to balance out the revenue between private pay and broker. Not that I have anything against broker work. I just think it's nice to have your own pipeline and continue to grow on the broker side as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you have any like sort of plan in place about how you're going to get that private pay work?
Absolutely. So a few facilities actually reached out to us just through word of mouth and seeing us. Another one is just going door to door, whether it's dropping off donuts, baggies, whatever it is, swag, I'm going to do it. And I think now with onboarding this second dispatcher, that second backup, hopefully I don't get thrown into the fire as often, so that, it frees up my time to go do, the business development side, essentially.
Yeah. Awesome, man. What are the most unexpected things that you learned as you've grown ReliaWheels? And I know that like the answer could be everything, right?
Literally everything. Literally everything. Unexpected. I guess just when I thought I heard every excuse not to show up to work, I learned 100 more. Not to say that they're excuses, but just things in life that could happen, right? And one thing I did notice, and kind of the plug that I fixed, was having extra backups. I still don't have enough backups. Like tomorrow, I think we already have a fire to put out. Two drivers, can't make it in tomorrow. So right there, boom, two of my backups are out.
So then
So
what
yeah,
situations?
say that again.
So what do you do in those situations?
Cry, put our shoes on, tie them, and go to work. Yeah, it's just going to be all hands on deck tomorrow. Yeah, it's as simple as that. It does get a little tough with. I mentioned I have two kids. My wife works. Luckily, she works from home, so I can always dispatch essentially in a worst case scenario.
Yeah.
Getting in the van can be tough depending on what we have going on that day, and if my wife has meetings, etc.
Okay. Any other big sort of growing pains that you feel like, hey, these would be good learnings to share with the audience?
Another thing on my radar, obviously, as the fleet grows, back when I was driving, or my mom, we kind of started, close family people that I don't want to say that all our employees don't care about ReliaWheels. They do. They might not just be as detail oriented, right? So my mom, boom, a light turns on in the van, she takes it to the auto shop. Me, when I see that oil change has to happen, boom, take it to the shop. Whereas now my second dispatcher, I'm essentially going to have them the designated maintenance man, so that I don't have to, go around. And we obviously have the odometer readings from Bambi, which is nice. I just could never remember the sticker. What it says in the sticker of the van as far as like when the last oil change was.
Yeah.
So it's always a Tetris match saying in the Bambi chat, like, "Hey, who needs an oil change? Go now. Like, we'll free up your day, trip wise, an hour and a half or however long you need." So yeah, just essentially we not necessarily tweaking, but just fine tuning, trying to put on paper everything that I do that I don't even realize it. So last week we actually had a flat tire this morning. Last week we had two flat tires, all three different vans. And my dispatchers called me. They're like, "Hey, what do I do?" They called flat tire. And I said, well, first find out where they're at, then Google search, towing companies in the area. While you get one of those, try to get one, let them know what we do, saying that we need to get back on the road ASAP. Um, Once you, essentially assign a tow truck to the van, then look for tire shop in the area. So that boom, I mean, this morning it happened. I'm gonna lie, I don't know what time it was. It might have been 7 or 8 in the morning, but we were back online, and he was doing a trip by 9:45. So it was like boom, boom. If you got to call five tow companies, whoever can get out there the soonest, and spare us the minutes, the five phone calls go by fairly quickly. Um, but yeah, so all of that stuff I essentially don't have written down. It's just stored up here. So anytime like a fire happens, it's like, oh, do this, do this, do that, So I think fine tuning that stuff, putting it, in a procedures thing and kind of buttoning everything up, so that, we are a business, right? A business, if I'm gone, the way I kind of define a business isn't if I'm gone, the business stops, right? The business should live on. There shouldn't be, minor issues, right? Obviously, you can't cover all the boxes or check off all the boxes, but getting that 90% there, and we're probably at 80% right now. So there's still some wood to chop.
Okay, that's a lot of percent. But at 90%, then you can step away and the show can go on.
100%. I
Okay.
could honestly, I have faith in our guys right now. The only issue is, if someone doesn't show up or someone's sick, which it happens. A lot of our drivers have families, have kids. Things happen to the kids. Now that school's out, that's going to bring a different, uh, dilemma, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, essentially just having to dispatch and that stuff, that's kind of where I plug and play. But if I went on vacation for a year or, got kidnapped, I do think that, we would make it. I have faith in the team for sure.
Well, Nick, the way you've grown the business, not easy, but it just sounds simple. If you had to share probably the most difficult parts about getting from your first vehicle to your 13th and growing to the business to this level, what would you say have been the most difficult parts to overcome?
100% finding good drivers. Um, I'll be honest, we got lucky. Um, you know, Maybe we have an issue with 5% of drivers, and they're not with us anymore. But definitely building that team that you can trust. Finding drivers isn't a once a month thing. I mean, I'm always looking for drivers. Even when I'm not looking for drivers, conversations are had with new drivers, essentially onboarding people, just to kind of anticipate if something's going to happen in a month or so. On the other side, to mitigate those risks, and another reason why I started this business was I kind of looked around to see who the competition was. And not to sound, whatever, but we don't really have competition. And what I mean by that is the level of service that we provide. All our vans are brand new. Our equipment's fantastic, and we pay our drivers top notch. That's made it easier for me, all around to get qualified workers, right? We're getting workers that already have 10 years experience in the business. They're just getting paid $5 less at another company just because that company, refused or neglected to raise their wages over the last 10 years. So, when we post, on the internet or on signs, hey, we're here, you want to drive, we essentially get endless calls that people want to join our team. Not only on the private pay side where they see our vans and they say, wow, I want to ride in that. Drivers are like, wow, that van looks like it has air conditioning. The van I'm driving now does not. So like these are the kinds of conversations I'm having with new hires as well. But just being in that, paying what's fair, staying at the top of the market. We pay bonuses. My drivers were shocked. 30 years they've been driving or doing, random jobs, never got a bonus. I gave them $1,500 at the end of the year. And for me, I would rather, make $1 and not have to worry less than make $100 and worry all the time. That's just, who I am. That's how I want to run the business. And I think everyone's kind of bought into that and they see it.
I love that, Nick. I love that. Too many people think of drivers as a cost rather than an asset. And, the proof is in the pudding with what you've been able to do at ReliaWheels and how quickly you've been able to grow. And you're at 80%, 10 more percent, and you can step away.
You said it.
To end things off, can you share maybe one of the most interesting or crazy or fun stories in the past 1.5 years of running ReliaWheels?
Crazy. So, real story here. A couple of weeks ago, I was actually in Florida for my sister-in-law's wedding, and I get a phone call. One of our drivers was at a local hospital here picking up a member. They were done with their appointment, and he locked the van and everything, went inside, found the members, brought them outside, couldn't open the van. The key fob wasn't working. And so I'm in Florida now, right? All our backups are driving. I want to say, I think I was dispatching. I had to dispatch like 3 out of the 5 days that I was in Florida, just because shit hit the fan, right? And so, um, essentially, I called my grandparents. That's what happened. I called my grandparents. I said, "Hey, I need you to go to XYZ hospital. You'll see our van. Before you do that, though, go to our office and get a spare key." I go, "I think the battery's dead. For some reason, the key fob's not working." And that's another thing that circling back a couple of questions ago, I spent probably like $15,000 just on spare keys, just to have more than enough, right? In case this happens or one of my drivers put one of the keys through his laundry machine. It was in his back pocket and he forgot about it. But long story short, I have a stockpile, as many keys as you could make. That was another thing I found out with Toyota. You can only have so many keys out, like programmed to the vehicle. Now with the new cars. And so, long story short, my grandparents go to the lot. They get a key. They drive out to the hospital. Now, like an hour and a half went by. Right, my grandparents drive 10 miles an hour on a 35. So I knew it was going to take them forever. Right. They get to the hospital and they find the driver. They give him the key. Boom, the key works. I ended up having someone else pick up the members just so they weren't waiting. And then my grandparents went, bought a battery, put the battery in the key, and the key worked. So it was a battery issue. Long story short, a couple $100 later on batteries. I have a huge box at the office, just waiting for more keys to die. We have backups.
Good to have grandma and grandpa around.
Now you said it. I honestly don't know what I would have done. I guess the driver would have had to walk to the nearest store to get a battery, or maybe even a tow company, now that I'm thinking about it. But yeah, you're right. You're right.
Amazing. Well, Nick, thanks again for sharing your story. It's super interesting. You're growing super fast, and I would wish you good luck in continuing, but I don't think you're going to need it. You seem like you got it together, man.
We'll definitely need it. I appreciate the kind words. Before we peel off, I do want to thank you guys. Nura, I've texted you here and there. You're like clockwork. I tell my wife, I go, watch this. I'm going to text them within 2 minutes. I'm getting a response. And it's not like, oh, wait a second. It's like, boom, here's the answer, or, here's where we're going. So I love that since day one, kind of when we were talking, when I was analyzing all the different companies. I remember telling you I had a long list. I essentially interviewed all of them, and demoed them. And I'm glad we picked you guys because everything that you said, from that meeting, not only has panned out, you guys have beat expectation. Back when I onboarded, the platform, I don't want to say it was simpler, but there were less features, right? It's still
I
simple
think you
and
were
clean.
within our first 30 customers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome. I love to hear that. And I remember I even told you, I said, hey, if I can give you feedback or whatever, if you guys have quarterly meetings, whatever it is, I'd be happy to help out. And that wasn't the case. I didn't have to really jump on any calls. Essentially, everything you rolled out, you said, listen, we have a plan, we have a deck, we just have to hit the target dates. And you guys threw in stuff that I didn't even think about. You filled all the gaps with everything that we did mention on the first call, but then you guys went above and beyond. So I can't thank you guys enough. Honestly, doing all of these trips, having all these drivers and vans, there's that saying, it's like, my mistake was being, 4 years old when the recession hit, like I couldn't buy properties. I am glad that, Bambi's in place now when I'm starting this, because go back 10 years or 5 years, whatever it is, I don't know how companies did it on pen and paper. I really don't.
Yeah.
I really don't.
Run, Bambi, run.
Run, Bambi, run. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Nick.